haven't screened the pile, so we're just going to go through them, and I'll read them aloud. And normally I give long answers, but there's such a stack of questions here. I'll try and be General Neil and keep... or General Brief and keep it Neil. Since DMT is present in the brain, does the introduction of excess DMT shut down the production of natural DMT in the way that the body stops producing opiates during opium usage? If so, what are the effects? Is DMT really so perfectly chemically benign? The first point to make is that many of your questions cannot be answered because research into these areas is not allowed. So often we can't answer your question. This question, does the introduction of excess DMT limit endogenous production? I can say with fair confidence that that's never been studied. My guess would be that it does not, because the DMT is in no sense of the word do you become habituated to DMT. I mean, a person who does DMT once a year is a fanatically heavy user, I would say. And the question, is DMT really so chemically benign? Again, this has not been studied the way you would study with rats and so forth to determine it. But experientially speaking, the amazing thing about DMT is the speed with which you return to normal. You return to the baseline of consciousness in under 10 minutes. Well, that tells you that the brain is very well able to deal with this compound. One way of judging how toxic a drug or a plant is to ask yourself the question, how long after I take it do I feel completely normal? And with DMT, you feel completely normal 15 minutes after taking it. It's the shortest recovery time of any drug. This question is concerning the bundle weed. While it does not directly meet the criteria of long-term use, is it to be considered safe? I'd say the way to answer that question is to do a chemical analysis of the bundle weed. If there's nothing present but DMT in it, I would think it should be considered safe. Now, there may be other compounds present. In South America, it's possible to contrast two plants, Psychotria viridis, which has almost entirely nothing in it except DMT as the portion of its alkaloid fraction, or Varroa carthaginensis, which is used in the making of snuff, and chemically it's a mess. It looks like they swept the floor. You've got NN-DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, alpha-methyltryptamine, monomethyltryptamine, 6-hydroxy-O-methyltryptamine. All of this you don't want. You want a narrow, a surgical strike on the synapse is what you're going for, not splattering all kinds of junk all over the place. What is the best medium for psilocybin spore germination? Potato agar or what? The best medium is rye malt agar, no question about it. Go with rye. Organic rye malt extract. In today's climate, talk about access to shamanic pharmaceuticals for the average person. This is the where do I get it question. Dressed up in respectable terms. Well, without being too self-serving, let me say my brother and I wrote a book on cultivating mushrooms called Psilocybin, the Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide by Otios and O.N. Eric. I'm Otios, as you can see. And I really believe in growing mushrooms. If you are, as you sit here, not psychically strong enough or balanced enough to take psilocybin, then if you learn to grow it at the end of that process, you will be. Because growing the mushroom teaches you cleanliness, punctuality, attention to detail, steadiness, all of these virtues, which are the very virtues you need to travel smoothly in that dimension. Other hallucinogens, other shamanic hallucinogens that you will find easily available to you without breaking any laws. The heavenly blue morning glories sold in every seed store and garden store are not to be taken. Do not take them. They have been dipped in a fungicide that will make you sick. Grow them and collect your crop and take that. And this is a major hallucinogen of great antiquity, extremely visionary. The Hawaiian wood rose. You can obtain this from people who make dried flower arrangements, often have these. Pay attention, you want the Hawaiian baby wood rose. If they try to give you something called Hawaiian wood rose, a big clunky thing, that is inactive and won't do it. The daturas are freely available. I do not recommend them. I recommend against them, but they're a common landscaping plant in Southern California, and the Jimson weed, of course, is growing out in the desert out around Lancaster and other places like that. There are a couple of companies which have very forthrightly decided to sell plants with a history of shamanic involvement. I own no stock in these companies, so I can recommend them without fear or favoritism. One is called Of the Jungle up in Sebastopol, California, and the other one is called Dream Gardens, and I think it's here in Santa Monica. Both of these groups publish astonishingly complete catalogs of psychoactive and shamanically important plants. Okay, that's access without going to the streets or committing crimes or anything like that. Can you tell us any more about Illinois bundleweed? I just did. And that's really all I can tell you about it. All these questions are the same question. Having convinced us of the wonder of DMT, what would be the easiest and quickest way to obtain it? How does one acquire DMT? Comment about the Supreme Court ruling against the use of peyote by North American Indians. A very bad law, obviously. Law so bad that the National Council of Churches, the National Jewish Affairs Committee, and some very large Catholic organization all filed briefs protesting this thing, and I think that it was actually realized that it was a goof, and it will be brought back in the you can't bring something back to the Supreme Court in a hurry, because then that's unseemly. But I would bet that within 5 to 10 years this will be overturned, because a close reading of this law means that wine for Pesach or communion could be construed as a psychoactive substance, and the whole thing, it was just bad law, bad idea. Has consideration been given to the possibility that, in the case of certain plants which are recounted in writings, but the identity is unknown, that the reason they are unknown is because shamans purposefully kept their identity a secret? Perhaps such secrets are still being kept. This goes to this question I raised this morning: how can a powerful hallucinogen, once discovered, ever be lost? And I've only been able to figure out one scenario in which this could happen. It happens like this. People discover a wonderful plant that imparts visions or insight or something, and everybody takes it and enjoys it, and then slowly a hierarchy emerges, a professional class, priests, and only they decree that only they will be allowed to take it. And then they lord it over the rest of society with an iron hand, And then the rest of the society gets fed up with that, and there's a slave revolt, and everybody in the ruling class is killed, and the sacrament is lost. I can't figure out any other way that it could happen. And the Vedic thing, this seems quite reasonable. Obviously, Soma was being more and more confined in its use to a single class, and then that class became viewed as obnoxious, and its overthrow and the death of this sacrament then follow each other. Perhaps such secrets are still being kept. Perhaps they are. The fact that this bundleweed could turn up at so late a date probably means that there are shamanic lineages with secrets that we don't know. As a field ethnobotanist and an explorer, I'm always interested in the unconfirmable rumor, and there are some doozies. The mysterious beetle from eastern Brazil, which causes intense hallucinogens if eaten. Here's a career for somebody. No hallucinogenic insect has ever been found, and yet there are persistent rumors in different parts of the world of either a butterfly or a beetle that is hallucinogenic. Most shamans in the Amazon, if you spend 5 or 6 weeks with them and take ayahuasca with them and tromp around with them, when you finally get to know them, they will allow as how there is another magic, which they call the magic of the big trees. And I've spent half my life trying to find out the names of the big trees, and I'm still working on it. We have collectors in Peru, and nothing is more exciting than a clump of rootstock or a seed packet that comes across our desk labeled suspect hallucinogen. That gets me to the edge of my chair. What do you think of Robert Monroe, The Journey Out of the Body Man? Well, this is a good time to discuss what do I think of all these other things on the spiritual market. I don't know what to think about them. I'm not a spiritual consumer. I've never been to a workshop that wasn't my own unless it was free. And there's a lot of stuff out there, you know, astral traveling, channeling, all of this stuff. And I tend to either believe it's bogus or it's for people with a psychic constitution considerably different from my own. Sometimes people say to me, well, these states that you're talking about, can't they be achieved without drugs? Well, the answer to that is, my God, who would want to? What would be proved by achieving these things without drugs? If the things I'm talking about began to happen to me without drugs, I would be very, very concerned and alarmed. Because, you know, I just don't... and also, I think there's something to be said for admitting that we cannot do it alone. That if you want this spiritual insight, if you want the Gaian matrix to welcome you, then humble yourself to the point of making a deal with a plant. That's the key. You can't enter the bank without the key to the bank. The key to the bank is a plant. Jumping up and down outside the bank and exhorting the banker to recognize your inner worth and open the door is just not going to do it. I can understand that psychoactive alkaloids are a survival mechanism for the plants. Why is that effect psychoactive in man or perhaps animal? Well, first of all, maybe we have to argue with your premise. You're right that a lot of these so-called secondary and tertiary compounds are elaborated supposedly to make things taste bad, so that birds will spit out things and stuff like that. But on the other hand, they've studied this question fairly closely, and a lot of these alkaloids are produced specifically to attract animals, to bring them in to nectaries and as pollinators and that sort of thing. old-style botany always believes these compounds are what's called tertiary to metabolism, meaning they're kind of like waste products and not very important, garbage. But when you look carefully at a psychoactive plant, invariably what you see is that the psychoactive chemistry is going on where metabolism is most active. This is an indication that actually these things aren't tertiary at all. They are doing something for the plant, but we don't know what it is. As to why they have this peculiar effect that they do in us, I think that's because there was anciently and over the evolutionary life of human beings actually a connection between us and nature. And that these drugs are the antenna, the switches that switch us back toward the logos of the natural world. I suspect that all of nature is a seamless web of pheromonally mediated connections and interactions, and that we are just not yet at a sufficient level of analysis and sophisticated observation to see this interconnected web. You know, our idea of nature is that it's all tooth and claw, survival of the fittest and the devil take the hindmost. The new version of evolution is entirely different. It says the way you attain survival is by making yourself indispensable to everybody else. So it's not by triumphing over the ecosystem, but by integrating yourself so thoroughly into it that it can't function without you. Then you're on your way to being a dominant species, not by crushing the opposition. Let's see how we're doing here. What are deconstructionists doing to our understanding of the language? Is it helpful? By deconstructionists, I suppose you mean Jacques Derrida and that crowd. Well, I think deconstruction serves a very useful function. I think we're unaware of how thoroughly language is the medium in which we swim, how thoroughly our world is built of language. In a way, the boundary-dissolving character of the plant hallucinogens is a dissolving of language barriers. They show you that the surface of reality was not the surface of reality, it was the surface of your local language. And now it's gone, and here is what lies beneath it. At what point in the evolution of organic matter on Earth do psychoactive plants appear, and why? Interesting question. If we're talking about psychoactive fungi, we're severely limited by the fossil record because no fossil mushroom has ever been found older than 40 million years. This is because fossil mushrooms are very soft-bodied, ephemeral kind of things. As primary decomposers, which is what fungi are doing on this earth, it's reasonable to assume that they must have been here from the very beginning of the conquest of the land, but proof in the fossil record has not been forthcoming. Now, if we're talking about higher plants, flowering plants, which is mostly what we're talking about here, then no flowering plants existed before 65 million years ago. Flowering plants emerged out of the same catastrophe that destroyed the dinosaurs and set the stage for the emergence of the mammals. This is something people don't realize. Flowering plants are as recent as mammals. You know, if you look at if the period of life on Earth is visualized as a yardstick, the period of the flowering plants is the last inch and a half. And it's also the rise of the mammals occurs in that last inch and a half. So before that, the plant life on the Earth was of a very different sort, and we know nothing about its chemistry. Here's someone who asked a Zen question. What would make the present government interested in the study of psychedelics? I don't know. If they could make a buck out of it. I don't think they're very interested in psychedelics. I don't think any political... What?
CIA, they were very interested in psychedelics.
Except that they abandoned it. Yes, MK Ultra, for those of you who don't know, stands for mind control, spelled the Southern way. Mind Control Ultra was a program the CIA pursued in the 1960s where they tried out all kinds of psychedelic drugs, and they also worked with it in combination with hypnosis. They were trying to make what they called the Trojan horse. This was somebody who would be an assassin but not even know it. And how far they got with all of this, we will never know, because of course it all disappears behind the walls of secrecy. But the declassified history of the CIA and LSD is very interesting. Some of you may know the book Acid Dreams by Martin Lee. Fascinating history of the way the government tried and really failed, I think, to use psychedelics. The government's initial approach to LSD was, this is great. This is a truth serum. We can give this to enemy agents and they'll tell us all we know. Well, a few months of following that path, they decided, no, this is an obscurity drug. We can give this to our agents and they can take it if they're captured and no one can learn anything from it. And, clearly this was not a fruitful path either. And I don't fault the government. I don't really fault the government for this. After all, the government is in the business of being the government. I don't think any institution can inculcate psychedelics into its own program, because psychedelics destroy institutions, all institutions. I mean, it's like trying to move an acid around that corrodes whatever pipes you pour it through. And because the boundary dissolving quality of psychedelics is precisely the quality that government is involved in resisting. Government builds up labels, hands out role models, explains how everything is, and this stuff just then melts that back into a primal chaos. So it's pretty corrosive of any social values that don't arise spontaneously out of biological organization. It's anarchist. It's the acid of anarchy in a way. All right, we're never going to get through this list, but it's gratifying to know it's here if we need it. Here's a question about the time wave, which I'm going to skip because we're not talking about the time wave today, and pity the poor soul who's never heard of it. Know of any herbal sources to raise serotonin as a treatment for depression? No, I'm not. I don't know a lot about herbal medicine and that sort of thing, but raising serotonin level as a treatment for depression seems like a pretty good strategy. I don't know of herbs. Usually inhibition of serotonin is what's going on. And with these psychedelics, they do compete with serotonin for the bond site. That's what it's all about at the atomic level, is in your synaptic cleft. In the synaptic clefts of your neurons, there are what are called receptors. And if you were to fly down and look at these things, they look like complex locks. They're hooks, protuberances, little drawers, and fit in places. Well, then the drug molecule is carried into the synaptic cleft by the bloodstream, and it seeks to what's called occupy the bond site, or simply bond. And it's trying to fit in. Well, the normal thing which fits in those bonding sites is serotonin. But some of these hallucinogens are much better fits than natural serotonin. They are what pharmacologists say competitive at the bond site. And so they literally elbow the serotonin out of the way, and then they fit themselves into the receptor. Well, once the receptor and its agonist are in place, then the biodynamic, the bioelectric field of the synapse can be activated. Well, if you swap out serotonin for an exotic molecule like harmine or mescaline or something like that, well, then this shifts the mode of this molecular level electrical environment. And I believe that that is what then registers as a higher cortical experience that we call the trip. It's the experience of hundreds of millions of these introduced molecules displacing the normal serotonin and then broadcasting this signal in a slightly different way than it is normally perceived. So there's a molecular connection. There's a connection down into the molecular level. This will be our last one this morning. Language transcendence. Huxley, Jung, and others often mention liberating and enlightening epiphanies as beyond language and iconic imagery. You yourself mention this. Can you explain further the use of transcendental language? Yeah, and we might talk about that a little this afternoon. I sort of alluded to it this morning. My idea is that language is a process that is half completed in us as we sit here, and that language is really something which wants to be seen, not heard, but that we are on our way to evolving toward this visible language. And we currently are operating with these somewhat substandard acoustical codes. And I think in a way history is the process of getting out, revealing, defining, refining this natural language. The place where the psychedelics impact upon us as social creatures is the language domain. I mean, you may have tremendous hierophanies and breakthroughs, but if you can't talk about it, or paint about it, or dance about it, or in any way communicate it to anybody, then it is not efficacious for the species. It's just your private entertainment. So the domain of language is where the collective impact is coming. And one of the things I think about psychedelics is that they are probably capable of helping us force the evolution of language, because we cannot move into the future any faster than our language of description for the future. So if we're interested in streamlining culture and getting away from this sort of random walk style of cultural evolution, then we have to look at rationally interfacing with the evolution of language. And maybe we can talk about that when we come back. Thanks very much. So let me explain something. The DMT flash is very brief. The mushroom experience is very long, hours. You can, if you are fortunate and took enough, on a psilocybin trip, you can work your way into a place which looks like a DMT flash, but it will take you a couple of hours of breath control and sitting in darkness and paying attention to get to this place. So I wanted to make clear that for my money, these hallucinogens all pretty much lead into the same place, but the experience of psilocybin and DMT is very different, if only because one is tremendously gradual, although it may not seem like that when it's happening, but compared to DMT, it's very gradual. It unfolds over several hours, while the other, you measure the DMT flash in hundreds of seconds. I mean, it is a flash, for sure. Okay. I'll just make my way through these, and we'll do as many as we have time for, and I guess we'll go till about 4. A recent LA Times Magazine article on Mayan excavation made passing reference to hallucinogenic enemas. Any knowledge of such practice? Good question, and humorous. Enemas were invented by the New World Indians, strangely enough. It was a route of drug administration unknown to Roman or Greek medicine. The reason the people of the Amazon basin invented enemas, 2 reasons really. First of all, they had these very strong corrosive drugs that they wanted to find a route of administration for. And the second reason was they had rubber. The South American forests are the source of rubber. So they invented the first enema, the first hot water bottle, and God knows what else. Decency should probably not even inquire. I've never taken a hallucinogenic enema, but in principle it may not be a bad idea with some things that are very sickening or like that. If you do an enema, though, remember that you cut doses to 1/3. You don't do a full dose that way, or you'll leave a human-shaped hole in the roof. Once the European contact began, enemas became just a fad in Europe, and they were even doing tobacco smoke enemas at one point, which is really weird. Okay. Please explain, I guess it says, propagation and appropriate dosage of betel nuts and kava. I don't know too much about betel nuts. That's Piper beetle. It's a vice throughout Southeast Asia. You probably all know the song from South Pacific, Bloody Mary's chewing betel nut. That's what that's about. Kava is Piper methysticum. This is a plant that occurs throughout Oceania and Micronesia, and has very exotic chemistry. Bisnoryangonine and norbeocysteine are the active principles. These 2 compounds are known otherwise only from a mushroom. Kava is a kind of dreamy intoxicant. You don't feel like doing much, but you really enjoy just sitting there on the beach, and it's soporific kind of. It causes a bizarre condition, which is called crocodilianism. And crocodilianism is where your skin dries and cracks and migrates into little pyramidal shapes. And when Captain Cook landed in the Hawaiian Islands, he was, of course, meeting the high mucky-mucks of the Hawaiian royalty. He thought everybody had leprosy. He didn't know what kind of a hell he'd fallen into until they put it together. He said, no, these are the royal families. All of these people are suffering from kava addiction, crocodilianism. It's not pleasant tasting. It's not a pleasant high. But recently I was in another state, and I had an errand to go. A very chance errand carried me to the house of someone I didn't know. And there on the table in this house was this huge bowl, this carved Fijian kava bowl. And I walked over and looked at it, and it was full of this milky, creamy stuff. And I stuck my finger in and I tasted it, and it was kava. And I turned to the lady of the house. I said, "What's the story?" And she said, "My husband was in the Peace Corps in Fiji. He loves this stuff. And so then I met him and talked to him about it. He said, I'm a chronic alcoholic. I can't touch a drink. I can't touch a drop, but I drink this and I love it. And I said, well, do you know about crocodilianism? And he said, oh, yes. And he lifted up his shirt and scratched his chest, and a huge cloud of dandruff rose. So sometimes you never know. It's the people I hang out with. Could you ask the mushroom what we should do about George Bush? I have hope for the man. He has such a botanically promising name. The ones that I'm not reading aloud are the ones which seem to go to areas of my concern that I haven't addressed here today, so I don't carry you over into them. This is an important question. What is your view of introducing psychedelics to children and the initiation of children into altered states? This is so controversial, so hot, that other than reading the question, I'm not sure what I could say. At the Bridge Conference at Stanford a few weeks ago, there was a woman's panel. Kat was on it, Carolyn Garcia, Cindy Palmer-Horowitz, Nina Gravois, some of the great psychedelic women. And this is very important to discuss. Some of you may have read Odd John by Robert Bly, where he makes a tremendous case that fathers should provide initiatory experiences for their children. And, you know, we're not talking an overnight trout fishing trip here, folks. I think this definitely needs to be discussed. I'd be more comfortable with women discussing it, because I think women are the caregivers and the child rearers largely. But it's really a problem. I mean, it's a problem for us that we even do these things in a climate of legal intolerance. And then, you know, to put it on to our children, to make criminals of our children. You know, I mean, you can lose your children with a stunt like that. This is very touchy, and yet I see it as a First Amendment right. It's a matter of religious conviction. And I don't know. My hope is that someday this religious conviction issue is going to collide right into the psychedelic issue, because I do not see how we can live under a constitution that guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and say that psychedelic drugs are illegal. I mean, if the pursuit of happiness means anything, it must cover that. Now, I've had constitutional scholars explain to me that, well, no, you don't understand. Hamilton wanted it to say life, liberty, and the right to own property, and Jefferson objected, so they decided they'd put in language that was meaningless, so they settled on the pursuit of happiness. But I say, let's take that meaningless language in the Constitution and turn it into the greatest social revolution that's ever been seen. Children and psychedelics. And here's a technical question that is about mushroom media that we should spare the rest of you. All three explanations of the tykes are interesting, but are interpretations of experience. What if your tykes are contemplations which are becoming as diversely as they see themselves? The self-reflection of intelligence contains all forms. Correct, but then why these forms, and why so persistently? You know, to anybody who says something is everything, devolves the obligation of explaining then why it appears to be specifically something. And I've taken lots of psychedelic compounds, and I don't get tykes anywhere else. I think this is somehow specific to the beast. Oh, this is more a statement than a question. Quantum mechanics, especially the Schrodinger's cat experiment, show that we are simultaneously dead and alive, rather like a Kekule resonance structure of the two. DMT creatures are consistent with contemporary science. This is true. I mean, language is what divides, but what is divided is not divided. It simply appears divided through the convention of language. I'm real uncomfortable with this death and DMT issue because I don't know quite what to do with it. It's a little, I like profundity, but even that seemed like deeper water than I wanted to get into. How does ibogaine relate to MDMA in opening the heart? Oh, this is a funny thing about compounds. Most drugs, after their discovery, in the process of entering general awareness, undergo a phase in which they are the love drug. This happens. Marijuana has been the love drug. LSD has been the love drug. Psilocybin has been the love drug. A slightly different kind of love, but cocaine has been called the love drug. MDMA is called a heart-opening drug, and ibogaine, as I talked about, and then I've had tremendous heart openings on other things not related to this. And even DMT sends you down with an acute perception and appreciation of what a wonderful thing it is to be alive. Chemically, MDMA doesn't relate to ibogaine at all. I think this opening of the heart thing is something that many drugs make possible, and we just need to give ourselves permission to do it. The great power of MDMA is in what's called directed psychotherapy, where a therapist helps you sort out your problem. But we haven't seen, nor are we likely to see, any comparison studies of how well MDMA stacks up against LSD or psilocybin or mescaline. Some therapists have preferred MDMA because they like how it sort of stays on the surface. No titanic hallucinations, no visitations by flying saucers, just an acute awareness of what a schmuck you may have been. Well, other people want this deep material, want the dreamlike mythological stuff to be brought up. So that's sort of a matter of faddism. I think that any drug that you're unfamiliar with may well open your heart. Just in poking around. Opening the heart is an act of attention in a state of unusual psychic dynamics, and the unusual psychic dynamics part can be provided by numerous substances. How rich in psychedelics are the Caribbean islands, especially Haiti and the Dominican Republic? There are psychedelic plants in the Caribbean islands. There are the mushrooms, certainly, and there are these Anodonanthera trees, the source of the Niopo snuffs, and there are daturas. There is also a fairly highly evolved folk medicine in some of those areas. If some of you are ethnobotanists or aspiring ethnobotanists, but you have language difficulty, think about some of the English-speaking islands of the Caribbean, or think about Belize. Belize is a fascinating cultural area. The three language groups of Belize are English, Spanish, and Mayan. And it's not at all unusual to meet someone who speaks Mayan and English. And that's what you're looking for, because then your informant, you can actually form a real relationship there. So there are many interesting plants in the New World tropics, including the Caribbean islands. Pardon me? Frogs. I don't know about Caribbean frogs, but since you raised this question, they're not frogs, first of all, they're toads. We don't want the toads to feel left out. This is a phenomenon that's arisen in the past few years. Some of you may know of it, that these large toads, Bufo alvaris toads, you can capture them out in the American Southwest at a certain time of year and take them back to your four-wheel drive vehicle and put pressure on the glands on the back of their neck and get them to squirt out 5-MeO-DMT, fairly pure. I mean, it looks like it must be 70% the real thing. Squirt it onto the windshield of your four-wheel drive vehicle, and then with your frost scraper, after a few hours, you can scrape this stuff up and bag it up and rush back to Berkeley and sell it on the street for $80 a gram. Toad foam. It's interesting. Toad foam is what it's called. It raises some interesting issues because, so far as I know, it's the only animal-based psychedelic to have any availability at all. There are known animal psychedelics. The most spectacular example is a fish off the coast of Norfolk Island in the South Atlantic, and this fish contains DMT, and there are other fish with DMT in them. But this toad foam is the first example of an animal-based hallucinogen actually showing up as a product on the underground. So that tree frog from Peru. This is, pardon me? Is that the Matisse word? Well, this is all Peter Gorman's field work. And I respect Peter Gorman. He's not a personal friend of mine because I haven't spent that much time with him. But he seems to know more about this than anybody else. He's the only white person to have any information firsthand about it. His account is that these extremely uncontacted people in the Amazon have a tree frog which exudes something on its belly, and they take a burning stick and burn a hole into the muscle of the upper arm, just like you would take a cigarette and burn a hole into your arm, and then they pack this hole with this material from the underbelly of this frog, and then a spectacular trip results. But this is entirely the reports of one field worker, which it's a dream come true for him. This is what we all want to do, is go off and find a powerful hallucinogen that nobody else knows anything about, and then bring it back. So that's a case of that. Here's a question, not terribly relevant, but I like talking about my friends. Can you talk a little about your association with Rupert Sheldrake? Rupert is a good friend of mine. He and Ralph Abraham and I are writing a book together. He's the morphogenetic field man, and this is an alternative hypothesis to the scientific hypothesis. One way of thinking about psychedelics, and I didn't mention it because I didn't want to have to sketch you Sheldrake's cosmology, but since the question was asked, one way of thinking about psychedelics is they amplify the morphogenetic field. We see then what connects whatever you're looking at, then you see what is connected, because the morphogenetic field, which is there all the time, but which is sort of mitigated against by our language habits, becomes suddenly visible. And then my time wave, which I've strictly avoided talking about today, is an effort on my part to actually write an equation for the Sheldrakean morphogenetic field. And you see, Rupert's idea is not that powerful until somebody can walk to a blackboard and write the equations for the morphogenetic field. Until that's done, he's in the position that James Clerk Maxwell was in vis-a-vis the electromagnetic field, until somebody then, James Clerk Maxwell in this case, figured out the inverse square law and what the constraints were, and then wrote the equations of electromagnetic radiation. Could you elaborate further on the nature of MAO inhibitors? I will, since I mentioned it and it's worth understanding. It's that monoamines are these simple chemical compounds that are very active in biological systems, including all the drugs we've been talking about and many drugs we haven't mentioned. These are all monoamines. Well, then you have a system in the body called monoamine oxidase. The ACE on the end of a word indicates you're dealing with an enzyme, transcriptase. But this is monoamine oxidase. It oxidizes monoamines. It makes them harmless byproducts. So if you take a drug, one of these monoamines, it is monoamine oxidase that will render it harmless and shunt it to your urine. But there are what are called monoamine oxidase inhibitors. And that means that if you take the MAO inhibitor, now the monoamine oxidase can't destroy the monoamine, and the monoamines accumulate, and you get high. That's what happens. And sometimes monoamine accumulation can be a self-generated toxic state, where for some reason toxic byproducts aren't breaking down. Then they will give you monoamine oxidase to oxidize these products away. But it's a reasonable strategy to try and jam the monoamine oxidase machinery to allow an exogenously introduced monoamine to then accumulate to intoxicating levels. So it's just a pharmacological strategy. Where does one obtain high-quality cubensis spore prints or cultures? Well, I mentioned my brother and I wrote a book on growing psilocybin mushrooms. You can order it out of the catalogs that are at the front. There's an ad in the back of that book for high-quality spore prints, and a company called Syzygy will send you a little plate of glass with more spore prints on it than there are people in North America. Are North American cubensis mushrooms, do they have lower potency? And can this be overcome by selective breeding? Selective breeding of mushrooms is an excruciating task. First of all, you have to be able to work with a microscope powerful enough that you can push one spore against another, keeping a third spore out of the picture. What people call breeding is where you inoculate to a plate two separate strains, and where the two growing edges meet, you cut a square out of that and austerize it and then re-inoculate. But that's not really selective breeding. Are North American cubensis mushrooms lower in potency? Yes, they are. Apparently, equatorial heat has something to do with the production of psilocybin. Say something about San Pedro cactus as a psychedelic agent. This is one of the ones that sort of got left out of the survey this morning because I was ripping right along. This is a very large columnar cactus that grows on the northeast coast of Peru and contains mescaline, just like the peyote cactus. And it has been used for a long, long time. We have pottery out of Peru, 3,000, third millennium BC of this San Pedro cactus. It's a very powerful shamanic agent. Marion Woodman, who I guess spoke to you recently, has stated one of the most noteworthy archetypes to surface in recent Analysan's dreams is the Black Madonna, a blending of mother and whore energies. Would you comment on this in the light of your psychedelic experiences and the re-emergent of the feminine energy? Well, I think, the goddess is on the move. The goddess is, this archetype is drawing energy with a fury that has not been seen since the Angevine court of Eleanor of Aquitaine. And it's a re-imaging of deity that is going on at every level. And certainly on psychedelics, you have immense moving experiences of the goddess. If you invoke the goddess in that situation, you can confront her. This is all part of this archaic return. I mean, it's happening on many levels. And imaging the supreme power of the universe as feminine, boundaryless, penetrating, is very important. Let me say just a bit about gender politics, because sometimes people think I have no use for men. When you look at human beings against the background of the rest of nature, we are all so yang that the struggle between the masculine and the feminine is not something that should be fought out between the two varieties of human beings. A proper reconnection to the feminine would be a reconnection to the vegetable matrix. This is the passive, enfolding, caring, bearing matrix of life on the earth. And all animal life comes off as tremendously young, regardless of its sexual expression. So I think we do have work to do on gender relationships between men and women. But more than that, we all have a great deal of refeminizing to do vis-a-vis the living earth. Alrighty, right. Does one need a shaman guide in order to enter the world of sacred plants? Is there a danger in working with sacred plants without a shaman? Does one need a shaman guide in order to enter the world of sacred plants? This is the question of the sitter. You know, if you're going to experiment with these things, should you have someone sit with you? I think in the name of prudence, the answer has to be yes, at least the first time. I'm a little uncomfortable giving that advice because I don't like sitters. They hold me at the surface. And if there's a person around, that's what I end up thinking about. I want to get everybody out of the way so that I can make a very clean, deep plunge to where I'm going, and I don't want any witnesses. Because one of the things that happens in psychedelic states is often you're going through something, you're totally ecstatic, but the presentation of it is crisis-like. There you are, you're on the ground, covered with dirt, moaning, screaming, and you say, are you all right? Is something wrong? And the answer is no, nothing's wrong, everything is fine. But the person who has the expectations of the culture of what means right and wrong will bring you down with their... And this is why, remember in Cien Años de Soledad, when José Arcadia Buendía chained himself to the tree? This is a good technique. I've done this. I've chained myself to a tree so that I would not present a problem to myself. And then I took it with perfect confidence all by myself because I knew I couldn't get away from my tree. Although maybe I could fall out of my tree. Is there a danger in working with sacred plants without a shaman? Well, I suppose the New Age answer is certainly. My answer is no less danger than there is working with a shaman, I would say. I mean, you got to watch these shamans, you know. They're a fairly beady-eyed lot. It is the archetype of the trickster. Don't forget that. I mean, the notion that this is just some open-hearted little forest fellow who wants to tell you all his hard-won secrets. I mean, that's a cheerful assumption. Of course, you don't want to go too far the other way. I always have. I find over and over in the Amazon when I'm off with these people, we come to the place where now we've taken the ayahuasca or whatever it is, and I'm sitting across the fire looking at this guy, and I realize, you know, we're 4 days up this river and 2 days down this trail, and then I realize with perfect certainty that they're going to kill me right there that evening. This, you have to have a chat with yourself about this kind of thing well ahead of time, because you must be able to discipline your hind brain. Your hind brain is always telling you crazy stuff to blow your focus. And you just have to say, no, he's not going to kill me. And even if he tried, I'm bigger than he is. So, you know, and work your way out. But this thing of cross-cultural shamanism, I don't really know what to do with it. I see the shamans, noble souls, brought from the Peruvian jungles, and they do not do well in these cultures. We don't understand what a corrosive force we are. We don't understand what an air ticket to Paris means to somebody who's never been to the big town at the bottom of the river. And we tend to hold things so close to our chest that we smother them. I think it would be a good idea to leave the shamans in the jungle, and if it's so damn important to you to spend time with them, then bite the bullet. Go there. Go to them. I mean, what kind of spiritual quest is this where we fly the teacher in to a waiting group of sycophants? How are we doing? Oh, we're not doing so well. That was the last question, folks. Well, I'll smooth the gaffe by saying this is important, and it may sound like fluff, but it isn't. We look exactly like everybody else to most people. And we will now leave this hall and disappear back into our lives. But you might take a moment. This is your affinity group. It's preposterous, demeaning, and unhealthy to focus on one person. You know, the Terъnс Маккена, the Tim Leary, the John Lilly. I mean, hell yes, we're great people. But so are you. And this is your affinity group. Someone in this room has what you need. Someone in this room appreciates what you've got. So look at each other and pay attention. We are each like a virus, empowered now to go out in society and spread this new meme, this new permission, this new community of awareness of the archaic option. And so I think you are to be congratulated. You are what makes this all go. If it weren't for you, I would be behind bars. I don't know whether it would be a mental hospital or a state prison, but they'd figure that out later. Thanks to you, we have a movement. And this movement offers hope. And I think we need to speak clearly about this hope to people who are not aware of it. An idea has no power unless it is communicated. And we are to some degree in the closet. We are prudent. We don't say we're gutless. We say we're prudent. We're prudent. Say, this is no political climate in which to be X, Y, and Zing. But actually, there's no better political climate than the present in which to raise these issues, because the rainforests are being destroyed, the native cultures are being destroyed, our authenticity as free-thinking people is being destroyed, all around the issue of the suppression of altered states and freedom to conduct the spiritual quest any way we want. And if we don't raise our voices in protest against this, then without doubt it will be slowly drained away, and we will be left in even more of a psychic desert than we already inhabit. So this is the last opportunity. I think that in 100 years the earth will be empty. And whether that will be because we are extinct or because we found home is entirely up to us. But our story, the story of the errant monkey, is coming to an end. The final seconds of that story are ticking out. Is it to be followed by no more story or a new chapter, a new story? Well, this has to do with how much integrity, how much self-generated love, and how much intelligence we can bring to bear to the human dilemma. And these plants, these sacraments, are central to a full exploration and understanding of what it means to be a human being. It's just that simple. Thank you very much.